fuel subsidy removal, the suspensions. We will dig in, we will dive in, we will shred the matters, we'll look at the politics of it, we'll look at the economics of it, and we'll also take a look at the socials of it. So I'll be starting in a bit. So in case you're watching, you want to be part of the conversation, please feel free to do that. All you need to do is to join us on all our social media platforms. You can start by tweeting us. Our handle on Twitter is moneylinetv. You can also join me on Twitter and send your comments as well as your opinions and questions on the suspension of the fuel subsidy removal. Like I said earlier, it's a panel today, and I will start my panel introduction with Olumide Esan, the partner energy tax lead at Deloitte, Africa at Deloitte. Mr. Esan, welcome to the program. And can you hear me?
Thank you, Nancy, and good morning to viewers. Yeah.
Okay. And I have Dr. Gilly-Harry, the president, Petroleum Product Retail Outlet Association of Nigeria. He's also joining us today. Dr. Gilly-Harry, welcome to the program. We would also be joined by the former General Secretary, Nigeria Labour Congress, who happens to be an economist, Dr. Peter Ozo-Esan. He will join us in a bit. But before we go into the discussion proper, let's quickly take a break. I'll be right back. Earlier on, I did say that I'm hosting a panel on the suspension of the fuel subsidy in Nigeria. We do know what happened last week. In fact, a lot of Nigerians started panicking, and we saw a few stations, at least here in Abuja, a lot of motorists trying to buy fuel to stock up. I said earlier on that I have my panel. Olumide Esan is the partner and energy tax lead, Africa, Deloitte. And I also have Dr. Gilly-Harry, who is the president, Petroleum Product Retail Outlets and Owners Association of Nigeria. Dr. Peter Ozo-Esan, an economist and the former General Secretary at Nigeria Labour Congress, will be joining us shortly. Let me start with Mr. Esan. Welcome again to the program, and if you can hear me and see me, let me start with these. You know, we've seen the elimination of subsidy on other liquid fuels like kerosene as well as diesel. Why is this difficult for petrol? Why?
So thanks, Nancy.
Yes, I can hear you.
Of use by so many Nigerians to fuel their cars and even generators at home. Most of the transporters use petrol as well to fuel their vehicles. So if you look at the way the Nigerian inflation runs right now, just about 16% inflation, and the biggest basket is food, okay? And the biggest influence on food is transportation. So if you suddenly remove subsidy, what happens is the cost of transportation gets out of control. It impacts food price significantly and then impacts general inflation. You may see a runaway inflation well over 20% if you suddenly remove subsidy from PMS. That is why it is so important to Nigerians. Maybe now just a step back to analyze this. On the average this year, a barrel of oil has been sold for $80. Okay, if we translate that into naira at 412, that is roughly about 32,000 naira per barrel. There are about 160 liters in a barrel, assuming there are no wastages. And then what you find is the crude itself alone translates into 200 naira per liter. 200 naira per liter, that's the crude itself. If you look at refining, on the average, it's like 0.07 dollars per liter, which is like 30 naira. So if you just look at the crude cost itself, which is about 200 naira per liter, and cost of refining it, which is about 30 naira, you're looking at 230 naira per liter. That we are selling for 145. We have not included the cost of transportation. We have not included marketing cost and all of that. So clearly the subsidy is real. But unfortunately, we found ourselves in a catch-22, conundrum where we have to be strategic as a nation to get out of it. It is not good for our health as a nation. It is not good for our economy as a nation. It's not good for business. I suppose maybe as this conversation progresses, we will find time to talk about the other elements of the subsidy.
You said it's 160 liters in a barrel of crude. We will come back to that and try to interrogate that further and know perhaps how much daily consumption that we do have in Nigeria, which has been a very sticky issue. But let me quickly bring in Dr. Gilly-Harry. Doctor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you, but you're cutting it, you're breaking it.
Okay, if you can hear me, the question for you is that we've seen that the petrol subsidy has created these price differentials between Nigeria and some other neighboring countries. Why do you think that, or how do you think this can be curtailed? And government officials have come up to say that smuggling of fuel is going around West African and neighboring countries. How do you think this can be curtailed? Because from your association, or you are the president of the association, what do you think can be done?
Well, the answer is very simple. One of the reasons why we as an association was pro-subsidy removal was to discourage smuggling of petroleum products from Nigeria to other countries. Because basically, when we consume X amount of petrol per day, and we discharge, we load so much liters from all the depots, most of those products will definitely find itself out if our consumption is limited to peg to a certain number. So our solution is simple. Ensure that all petroleum products lifted in all the depots do not find themselves outside of the country. So all the border stations will have to be given adequate security to make sure that petroleum laden trucks of any description, whether it is in jerry cans or in trucks or in tankers, are discouraged. We as an association have already advanced the process where we have introduced the petroleum product passport to help ensure that our members carry adequate, clean, accurate, and trackable, products. So this is a big solution to that. We also have the 3P seal, which makes sure that when product is loaded in a particular depot, it cannot be discharged anywhere except where it is authorized, unless the tanker owner or whatever wants to destroy the truck, and in which case it's going to explode into flames. So there'll be no benefit for that. So we need solutions that can help our security and our regulatory agents to make sure that they curtail the size of petroleum product that is filtered out of Nigeria. I think that's the only solution to it. Other than that, we should make sure that our retail outlets sell only product that is approved by NNPC, PPMC, and the downstream, midstream and downstream authority. So now I think that's just the solution. So we don't need to have too much argument with our neighboring states when we have effective methods of protecting ourselves from, subsidizing petroleum product here that will now be taken out for the benefit of other West African or East African or Central African countries, as the case may be.
Doctor, let me still stick with you. Do some of your members smuggle fuel to other neighboring countries? Because how does it get there? I was speaking with the NNPC GM, the NNPC Limited GMD, I think in December last month. And
sorry, you're not coming clear to me.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's a question that some of our members will support.
Yes. Do some of your members
petroleum product smuggling?
Yes.
The answer is no.
Okay. So how do
anywhere in this country that will support smuggling of petroleum product outside of this country? Because we are patriotic minded, and we encourage our members to be disciplined. And I can tell you that is the currency that's going on, because this economy, we will not have a second, no matter how rich an individual is, it will get back to the same market and suffer the same losses and the same infrastructural deficits if we allow any kind of income that should grow this economy to be filtered out by allowing for any kind of smuggling. So if our members are not interested in smuggling, and they will stop it by all means. And that is what we are doing right now.
Okay, do you have an idea of how those petroleum products are smuggled out of Nigeria? And I know why I'm sticking with that question a little bit. Just like I was saying earlier, I had a discussion with the GMD of NNPC Limited last month.
Right now, I'm at the airport. I'm heading back to Abuja for a meeting on trying to find solutions to ensure we support the government in making sure that products are not smuggled out. The simple thing is, somebody loads petroleum product in a depot, in a government-approved depot, and then he says, I'm taking it to X and Y location, and the product never gets there, or is never discharged there. So what happens? That product will be diverted, maybe within the country, to a station that don't need the product to sell at that material time. And so temptation comes, somebody comes and offer to buy that product off, and then he or she sells it. That person will be looking for how to make profit, because whoever our member that sold that product will not sell at a loss. So of course, the illegal smuggling of product, while it is not being done by our members, can be done by third-party agents that do not have the interests of this country. Maybe they are even foreigners, they are not Nigerians, who find a way into Nigeria because of our weak naira to buy petroleum products at the price for which we sell, and then find a way to smuggle it out. Now, if our borders are porous and we do not have adequate security at the border to mitigate these nefarious activities, then the smuggling would have been accomplished and completed.
Okay.
So, but for what we have introduced as an association, we have what is called a 3-piece seal. The 3-piece seal is a mechanical and electromagnetic device that is controlled, via satellite and on the web. So there is just no way you're going to dodge that if every tanker is fitted with that particular device. You're not going to be able to discharge the product anywhere you like. You can only discharge only at designated areas. And the authorities, PPMC, NNPC, the midstream and downstream authority, the security agencies will have access to this data.
Okay.
And they will exactly know where to look for the product if it is not found there.
Okay.
So that would
Doctor,
be
I will come back to you
major.
in a bit. Doctor, I'll come back to you in a bit. Let's quickly take a break to bring in our third guest, Dr. Peter Ozo-Esan, the former General Secretary at the Nigerian Labour Congress. He's also an economist who will be wading in from the Labour side. Just send us your comments on our social media handles. We'll be right back.
They must be able to say, you know what, accept the fact that you have failed in some aspect or you have not done well. But most importantly, those your representative digitally, they must remain humble. They must understand that they are appointed to serve. Mr. President was elected to serve. You know, we understood the problem. We did not elect him to come and repeat the problems to us. We all know the problems. He was elected to bring solutions, to bring ideas, and also ensure that he appoints the right people with the capacity, with the competence, and with the character. Because character is missing.
The
when you look
C's
at
of leadership.
The character for me is really missing in this government. Because when you engage with public officials or public servants or appointed officials, why are you raising your shoulder? It's our tax money that literally runs the presidency and pay salary. So again, I think humility is important, beyond capacity and competence. That character is missing. And I think if they get it right, the Nigerian people will support them and we can make progress.
The best way to address
Welcome back to the program. Dr. Peter Ozo-Esan is joining us right now. Was the former General Secretary at the Nigeria Labour Congress. He's also an economist. Good to have you, Doctor. And let's get straight to the question because we have two other people on the panel. The question I'm posing to you as Labour, because I know you've done a lot of work in the past, around this fuel subsidy issue. And the subsidy issue has been there, I think, since 80s or even more than or far than the 80s. The question to you really is that, does Labour think that the subsidy is really designed for Nigeria's poor? Because if we take a look at it from the World Bank statistics or the Time for Business Unusual report that was released in December by the World Bank, it stated that 3% of Nigeria's poor buy subsidized petrol. So 3%. And the question is, how many Nigerians also have cars? The last data we saw from 2018, about 12 million people. So does Labour think that this subsidy is really designed for the poor when a lot of rich people have cars and,
Well, that argument has always been made. The distributional implication of the subsidy, who benefits which class. The fact of the matter is that we first need to understand what the basic transport infrastructure is in Nigeria in order to understand who benefits. The average worker who may not own a car uses small vehicular taxi or bus to commute to work. And a huge part, a substantial part of his monthly income goes as fares for such transportation. When you increase, because this remove subsidy or not remove subsidy, the actual end product is the increase in the fuel price. When you increase the fuel price, automatically, even by a larger proportion, transport costs are adjusted. And that, therefore, immediately, the average worker, the poor worker, who has to pay those fares, see that virtually their salary is gone. That is one level. The second level, and probably more fundamental, is that when you look at the structure of how we move food items, commodities around, plantain, cocoyam, yams, and various other things are produced in the rural area. People go to take those out. Fuel is an important element of the cost of those movements. When you increase the cost of fuel, the cost of those products also increase. These are the considerations. It is true that the rich own cars, and therefore they benefit from this subsidy. In economic terms, we say that the subsidy is not targeted and it is not smart. There are ways that you design subsidies so that they are targeted. But the unique thing about the fuel one is that this has a history. It evolved out of the situation that we have oil, and that therefore, as a resource that we are endowed with, it ought to be cheaper in our country. And that is how commodities operate. That's how comparative advantage is conferred on economies in economic literature. If you have abundance of a particular product, that product is cheaper in your country, and that gives you a comparative advantage in the production of those things that use that commodity. And we are throwing everything away. Yes, World Bank does its studies, but it is ideologically driven. They have taken the ideological position that Nigeria must be the same, pay the same price as the global economy for fuel. Unfortunately, they refuse to take the position that Nigerian workers must be paid the same wages as all over the world. Because we are talking of relative prices. Relative price between wage is a price. Relative price between wage and fuel. And for instance, if we do those ratios, we will see that Nigeria is paying excessively high for these products. So I think that we need to actually, when we use on the surface economic analysis, I laugh. because we need to understand the whole logic of the economic theory and therefore apply it to the specific situation in order to us to come to a position.
Okay, let's bring in Olumide Esan, and I hope you've listened to Dr. Ozo-Esan here. Olumide, earlier on before Doctor came in, you said that this fuel subsidy is not good for the economy. Doctor also has made a very smart point that the World Bank or international bodies that talk about fuel subsidy and all of that are not also looking at the living wage of Nigerians, for example. A Nigerian earns 30,000 naira minimum wage. So how do you really juxtapose that? That's the first aspect of your question. The second aspect also is how much of a fiscal burden is this for the economy? This year, even last year, we are borrowing to subsidize fuel.
So thanks, Nancy. And I did allude earlier that it could lead to skyrocketing inflation if we were to just remove subsidy like that. That's why I describe it as a conundrum in the first instance, because really, which is which. But having said that, look at the statistics. Right now, we had the past budget of 17.6 or thereabout. 70.2 trillion, yeah. And we have revenue base targeted at just over $10 billion naira, 10 trillion naira. Now we're going back to the National Assembly to add additional 2.5 trillion to the budgeted expenditure, which takes the expenditure to about 20 trillion. The 20 trillion expected to be financed with revenue of 10 trillion. So in other words, we're going to have a budget deficit of, of 10 trillion. You can argue that right now, Nigeria's, debt to GDP ratio is about, 35%. But I think a lot more people are worried about the fact that our debt to revenue ratio, it's intimidating, I have to say. Right before this new development, we had targeted 3.6 trillion as debt service for 2022, which is already like 35% of expected government revenue. Expected government revenue, I'm using very responsibly here. If you look at the trend over the past years, we've always been just around 70% of the expected revenue. In other words, whilst we have 10 trillion in the budget for revenue, we may end up with 7 trillion if we're looking at history. And so if you're expected to make 7 trillion in revenue, you already have 3.6 trillion as debt service. It means 50% of your revenue will be used to service debt. As a matter of fact, for 2021, we used almost 80 or 90% to service debt. Now, there's no other way to finance this additional 2.5 trillion except through additional debt issuance. So you find out at the end of 2022, we may end up using 80% of the revenue to service debt. So it's clearly not healthy for the economy and it's not sustainable. Unfortunately, whilst the argument can be made that 35% to GDP debt burden is fair and consistent with what healthy countries are doing. A lot more countries are doing more than that. What is unfair is the fact that unlike the other countries, including our West African neighbors, who have on the average like 17% tax revenue to GDP ratio, Nigeria has just about 6%, just under 6% of tax revenue GDP ratio. So we cannot compete with those countries in terms of the debt burden they can pick. Really. So the strong limitation is our tax revenue to GDP ratio. Now, we can have this debate, it's not good for the economy, but at the same time, it will cause injury to Nigerians if we suddenly remove subsidy. Now, what should government be doing? And that is where I think for us, the debate we should be having is what are the alternatives here? I've said in some places before that we can do a phased removal of subsidy, okay? In which case, what we do is first target private sectors, private individuals riding their own cars, take them off subsidy. We not and leave commercial transportation still under the
How do we
subsidy
determine
scheme.
that?
How would we do that?
Yeah.
There are challenges around data, but it might be that you designate certain NNPC filling stations and say, look, this is only for commercial bus drivers. So put some check and balances in place to ensure it works, while others, buy fuel at commercial prices. But a more sustainable solution is to create alternatives. It's always better if you have alternative and then you remove subsidy. You can use auto gas, you can use CNG. And even in Ghana, they're using CNG a lot more these days. Compressed natural gas will cost just about half of what PMS costs. What government needs to do is to invest in midstream infrastructure. Good enough, they have some provisions in the PIA which supports midstream infrastructure, including dedicating 0.5% of bulk sales of petroleum products into that fund, and also gas flare collections paid into that fund. We also have the national gas empowerment program, expansion program in place, where CBN has put some 250 billion in. Let us harness all these various funds available. Government needs to inject a lot more to make sure that we can build infrastructure that can sustain, compressed natural gas across the country. Let's build skid stations. Let's build, dispensing stations in collaboration with the private sector. Then people will have alternatives. And if we government, and then of course there is a conversion kit which costs between $600 and $700 per kit, which government can subsidize. When you have created an alternative, if you now say, look, I'm going to stop fuel subsidy, you have a valid case because you've provided alternatives for your citizens. But if you've not provided alternatives, it is difficult. Like I said, CNG costs less than half of what PMS costs. The truth is, it requires upfront infrastructure, which government must be interested in investing in. And again, it plays into energy transition because it's a cleaner fuel, because it's gas. It's even cleaner than auto gas, which is essentially LPG. So government must think about the long term, must think about the greenhouse, must think about the health of Nigerians, must think about the pockets of Nigerians. This is the time to look for sustainable alternatives. And that is, putting 5,000 in the pocket of the poor Nigerians is not sustainable in the long term. What is sustainable is, let us create an alternative. And true, with a 30,000 minimum wage, if you remove fuel subsidy at this point in time, you're going to drive a lot more people below the poverty line. It's the reality, okay? But then we need to look beyond now and say to ourselves, it is not, I've done a bit of analysis of what it looks like in the budget for us. It is not sustainable for us as a nation. And let's also remember, we recently passed the PIA. We are already, undermining the confidence that this is already setting the minds of people. The PIA provides in Section 205 that will be unrestricted market pricing for petroleum products. Now we're disobeying that law. Now the executive is trying to go back to the National Assembly to make some amendments into the PIA. It isn't good for business. We have licensed about 22 refineries in this country. People are withholding back the investment. Because Dangote has gone far, and quite a number who have gone far, like Walter Smith and the rest of them. Others will be watching the space. Nobody wants to commit millions and billions of dollars to investment where government will control the price.
Okay, Mr. Esan. Yes.
$5,000 per barrel refinery construction. So if you're looking at modular refineries, if you're looking at a 10,000 barrels a day modular refinery, you're looking at an average of $250 million investment. Now, anyone who's going to put that kind of money down must have some certainties around the fact that he will be able to sell his product and recover its cost plus a decent return. We, as a nation, need to face the reality and work towards a sustainable path to resolve the conundrum we find ourselves in now.
Okay, Mr. Esan, points taken. Let me have Doctor's reaction. I guess he's keenly listened to you. I also want to bring in this dimension because you talked about earlier countries that have commodities. Ghana has that commodity now. Ghana is producing oil. The last time I checked, I even checked this morning how much Ghana is selling a liter of fuel. It increased it even this January. 6 cedis, 9 pesewas. And I did the conversion close to over 400 naira in naira terms. For Saudi Arabia, for example, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest oil producer, is selling about 55 cents a liter of fuel, which is about 229 naira. So these are our pairs, and this is how much these countries are selling a liter of fuel. So just join that with your reaction to what Olumide has said.
Well, the statistics that he drew, the fiscal burden and the fiscal crisis we are in. I agree with him that we are actually in a situation of a fiscal crisis. That has been driven largely by debt and the burden of debt servicing. And we are going to continue to deal with that. However, I think that what is important to point out with regard to the impact on the fiscal relationships of the subsidy debate is that the figures that we are working with now, we believe, are grossly exaggerated. I was at the forefront of insisting that it was a recipe for corruption to allow one organization to import oil, to dispense it, to tell us how much it was, and to net out so-called subsidy. That is the worst arrangement you can make for transparency. I remember I had fought this on the board of PETROAN, and the NNPC representative told me, oh, they have experts, and the matter did not, they did not listen. The fact of the matter is really that when you are talking of 3 trillion, this figure, based on some fictitious figures of consumption or imports of products into the country, it is a recipe for corruption. And I think that all efforts should be made to ensure that there is transparency, that there is investigation of the claims that have been made so far. When we are able to do this and we know exactly what the actual consumption is, then we can use those figures to see the impact on the fiscal relationships. To come to the issue of the comparative prices. You remember when my opening statement, I emphasized the importance of relative prices. So if we want to take what it is in Saudi Arabia, you take it and you take it side by side with other prices, particularly wage in Saudi Arabia, and you compute a ratio. It is same for any other country that you want to do. It is only when you have done those relative computations that you can really make economic, scientific statements.
Okay.
It's not by absolute figures.
Okay. That's a debate for another day, Doctor, which you have just said, and I will need to do my research on that so that we can have more economic analysis on that. But let me come to you, Dr. Harry. Doctor has spoken and said we need to investigate how many liters of fuel. Is Dr. Harry still there? We need to investigate how many liters of fuel we do consume. For me, even as...
I'm here.
Yes,
I'm here.
even as...
Except I find it difficult to hear you.
Okay, even as a journalist that follows the money every day, I cannot ascertain that this is how many liters of fuel that we consume in Nigeria. During the Desani days as Minister of Petroleum Resources, she came out to say 35 million liters, it's advanced to 38 million liters daily, 40 million liters. Before we knew it, 72 million liters. Before we knew it, 93 million liters. Close to 100 million liters we do consume right now. As the president of the Petroleum Product Retail Owners Association, do you have an idea of how much we do consume in the country daily? Because like Doctor has said, we're seeing shenanigans going on there.
Well, first of all, that is a very, very troubling situation, because a country like Nigeria that has been dealing in petroleum product for these decades, we should have a method of having our data in place. But that is not to say that the data and the records bandit is wrong. We as retail outlet owners have always started the process of tracking products lifted by our members. And hopefully that will create the database that is required to be able to assist government. You remember earlier I had said that even the government also needs every citizen, everybody to be able to work together to help government to provide better policies. So that is a very difficult answer to give. And with our association doing what we're doing now, which we started only in October last year, we should be given maybe like about 18 months, 18 months, about 1 year, 6 months for us to get accurate data that we can be able to say. So I would say let that question wait to be asked sometime between June and December. And PETROAN will be in a position to say, yes, this is how many liters our members lifted, and this is how many liters that was sold from our retail outlets. The authority has a system where they are following up with drinks. PPMC has the Customer Service Express. Now we have our petroleum product passport that is going to consolidate on all of this. So at the end of the day, there will be much more accurate data. We can assure the Nigerian public that that information in the next 24 months will be accurate, at least to about 80-90% accuracy from us, because we will help the country to ensure that we have this data to help manage our petroleum resources.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Harry, for that, and I appreciate that you mentioned that today, at least the work you guys are doing, and I hope to follow up on that. Olumide, if you can hear me, let's come to the issue of the state of the refineries. Just like the argument that Doctor has done, we are an all-sufficient country. We produce crude, 1.88 million barrels puts in this year's budget. There are issues about the state of our refineries. The 4 refineries we have, private refineries in the pipeline. There's a Dangote refinery that will start operating later this year with 540,000 barrels initially, hoping to get to 650,000 barrels per day. Where actually is the missing link in all of this? And I must also say, there's a caveat. Dangote refinery is operating within the free trade zone of the country. So that means that part of what he should be doing should be exported, or majority of it should be exported. But some people will say, oh, Nancy, you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten that the federal government also invested $2.7 billion, or thinking of investing if they haven't put the money as at last year. So how does all this balance out with the state of our refineries and with the plans of building modular refineries in the oil-producing regions of the country?
All right, so thanks, Nancy. So starting with the issue of modular refineries. Modular refineries are good to have, particularly when you are in a country where you're struggling with shortages of refined petroleum products. They're called modular refineries because they are easily fabricated, they can easily be moved around, and they can be decoupled. They're meant to be plug and play. So unlike the mega refineries, it probably takes like 12 to 18 months to put together a modular refinery, and it could be anything from 500 barrels a day capacity to 30,000 barrels a day capacity. Like I mentioned earlier, it costs on the average maybe like $25,000 per barrel, each of those refineries. So if you're looking at a 10,000 one, it will cost you maybe around 250 million. As of today, we have 23 refineries. NNPC being the 23rd one. NNPC has 445,000 barrels a day capacity in its 4 refineries, 2 in Port Harcourt, 1 in Warri, and 1 in Kaduna. So the one in Port Harcourt already being refurbished, and the expectation is that at the end, 210,000 barrels, that's the one in Port Harcourt. At the end, it will start to contribute to, local, petroleum products used in Nigeria. Now, we have this debate, and of course, you've talked about it briefly about, how much exactly do we consume? I think some fair estimate is that we consume about, 18 million tons a year. So if you look at that, it means that the Dangote refinery, when it's fully operational at 650,000 barrels a day, will be able to provide all the needs in Nigeria, because with that, at full capacity, it would produce like 10.4 or 10.6 million tons of PMS, gas oil, another 4.6 for diesel, and maybe another 4 million tons for jet oil. So if you're looking at it, so a 650,000 capacity refinery will solve our issues operating at 100% capacity. So that means that if NNPC were to come on board with the 210, it provides us, some opportunity to export. If you look at all the licenses that have been issued so far, it comes to about 1 million barrels of oil a day that is required to service refineries. The question is, does NNPC even have that kind of capacity? Now, for some of the private refineries, may be that they will buy, privately from some other oil producers within Nigeria anyway. And of course, the PIA provides under Section 109 for domestic crude supply obligations. So if need be, the downstream regulator can inform the upstream regulator, then puts some restrictions on what can be exported upstream. But I know it's something most government wants to stay away with, because otherwise those upstream companies that have different covenants and constraints in their funding arrangement then get jeopardized if they cannot export their crudes, for which they already have some forward sales transactions agreements on. So it all comes to, again, saying that we need to sit as a government, strategically look, how does this fit into the long term? Are we licensing refineries? Are we also clear how we're going to get crude to serve these refineries? We put 1.8 in the 1.88 in the budget this year. We've hardly been doing 1.6, including condensate. Yeah. So the quota even given to us by OPEC, which is about 1.6 now, we've unable to meet it. We've been doing like 1.3, and then maybe another 300,000 barrels of oil of condensate. That's how we've been doing the 1.6. So we've been on this 1.8, 1.7 for years now, because we have underinvested in the upstream, because NNPC has struggled to meet capital cash calls over the years. So there's a need for total rejig of the entire sector, actually, and government must look at it as an entire value chain. So, you need to look at the upstream, you need to look at the midstream, you need to look at the downstream. So these modular refineries are all good, but at the end of the day, you need to consider, how do you regulate them? Do you have capacity to regulate 23 different refineries?
I'm on live TV, please stop the call.
How do you ensure abandonment provisions are taken care of? How do you ensure that abandonment are rightly done? And so, at the end of the day, the underpinning things also is the economics. Companies cannot really model if they are unsure of whether or not they were able to sell at unrestricted market price, which comes back to the issue of subsidy.
Okay.
So it's good to have all these modular refineries in place. If and all when they come on stream, if they do, we would have more than enough and we'll be able to export, refined products outside of Nigeria. But the question is the sustainability and the impact on the environment of having so much refineries all emitting greenhouse gas.
Okay.
So I think it has got to take a holistic view on where we want to be as a country. And again, I mentioned earlier, there are cleaner fuels still from hydrocarbon, like compressed natural gas or LPG. The question is, are we going to license all these?
Okay. Mr. Esan, I have to cut you there because we have to go very soon. But let me come to Dr. Harry very quickly, if you can hear me in 30 seconds. How critical is government's credibility right now in garnering public support, especially for this? Very quickly, 20 seconds if you can.
It's cheaper. What happens to all these refineries? What happens to NNPC? Nigeria has...
Okay. Dr. Harry, can you hear me? Dr. Harry, can you hear me if you can hear me? Okay, while we wait for...
I can hear you.
Okay, my question is, how should government garner public support? Because government's credibility has been eroded in just 20 seconds.
Well, I think the first thing that I will encourage government to do is, government is about people, people that are part of the population that will be governed. It's important always to look for viable, all-inclusive stakeholder thoughts and opinion. Right now, it is true that the government's action is going to erode public confidence. But you see, one of the things that I like about what Mr. Olumide has said is analyzing the value of the impact that these reversals will bring, but also the security and the poverty line that it will also develop. So, but I will advise some level of care in trying to make sure that policies made are true, the bare human face, and we all can live with it. Because after all, any policy that's made is made for Nigerians, and they should all be happy about it, not to grumble about it. So that's my advice to government.
Okay.
Sorry, Nancy, I realized I was speaking to mute all the while. You wanted to say something on the refineries.
No.
Can I still go ahead?
No, Mr. Olumide, can you hear me? Mr. Olumide, can you hear me? We were we were hearing you loud and clear. I just had to cut you off because we've got to go. We just have like less than 1 minute to go. We heard all what you said. I just wanted the closing remarks of every other person. So we heard what you said. Doctor, very quickly, your closing remarks. It's a difficult one. What do you choose, the egg or the chicken? Is that?
Well, I think that what government ought to be focusing on right now, and particularly for the rest of its term, because really it has lost a lot of credibility, is to try to regain some of those by two things. One, to ensure that all the money they have recently pumped in reviving the refineries, that refineries actually produce and supply products. That is one. Two is that they need to cooperate with the committees that are being set up at the National Assembly now to dig deep into this issue of what the quantity of products really is, and therefore establish if the Federation account has been abused through this process, and to find a way to stop it.
Okay. I think we'll leave it at that. Doctor has raised so many issues, but I must also say, Doctor, and you know, this is not the first time that we are seeing in National Assembly probes of different consumption, liters of fuel. So we'll follow this to the letter. Thank you very much, Doctor. I want to thank my panel this morning, but I will say that this is not the last. We would also create time again to have another elaborate panel on this planned fuel, on this planned suspension. I don't even know what to say again, but I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Peter Ozo-Esan, who is an economist and also the former General Secretary at the Nigeria Labour Congress. Olumide Esan, partner and energy tax lead Africa at Deloitte. Olumide, thank you for joining us again today, as well as Dr. Gilly-Harry, who is the president, Petroleum Product Retail Outlet Owners Association of Nigeria. Count me there that I'll follow you up on what you said in terms of what do we consume in Nigeria. That's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you all for watching. Let's continue the conversation on social media. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be that change that you want to see. Bye for now.